And joining me now is the mayor of Stillwater, Mr. Will Joyce. Mr. Mayor, thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me.
First, let's just get to the nitty gritty. Can you give us the latest numbers?
The latest numbers for today will come out in about an hour. So we're still, operating off yesterday, which is about almost 2,000 cases here in Oklahoma and just under 30 in Payne County.
Sure. You implemented some new measures recommending people to wear masks, extending your, I believe it was your emergency order. Can you talk about that? What prompted you to do that? What new measures are in place?
So we did extend the emergency order. That was really just in conjunction with what the governor has already, issued his orders through the end of April. So we went ahead and extended ours to match that. Also lines up with the federal recommendations coming out of the CDC in terms of the date right now. Same with the recommendation on masks. So that's a recommendation that's coming out of the CDC that folks who are out in public or may have to go out and run those essential errands can go out and get those, get those things that they need, but need to be wearing some kind of a cloth face covering while they're out, so that they, just minimize the risk of transmission to people while they're out in contact with folks.
And they don't actually have to be the real masks. They can be a T-shirt, a scarf, whatever, right?
Yeah, and they really shouldn't. So, I mean, we would prefer you don't use surgical masks or medical grade masks for this purpose, because those really need to be, if you have those, we'd love it if you'd take them over to the hospital or
Sure.
donate them somewhere where we've got medical folks who need them. For this purpose, we're really just looking for cloth face coverings. They could be homemade. They could be a scarf. It could be, I've got a kind of a ski neck sleeve that I wear. So really just anything that kind of helps prevent, if you cough or sneeze or anything while you're out in public, something that will help, keep that transmission rate down. Because the main concern here is that people can have this disease. You can have the coronavirus and you can be transmitting it and contagious with it without really even noticing.
Mm-hmm.
There are some folks who don't have major symptoms and they can be transmitting it without knowing it. And that's the purpose of this recommendation, because it's not gonna, if someone's sick and they cough on you or something along those lines, a mask like this isn't intended to keep you from getting the virus. It's intended to keep you from transmitting it if you have it, and to just reduce that risk while you're in public.
April, we're in this season of social distancing, and it also means tornado season. What's the contingency plan? What are the tips for that, should that come to it?
So, tornado season recommendations are generally still going to be the same, right? I mean, so Stillwater, as a city, doesn't have public shelters that are available. We don't have big buildings that we recommend people to go to in the first place. So you should have your own home shelter plan in place.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the central most interior room of your home. If you have plans, like if you've in the past you've gone over to a neighbor's house and used their basement or something like that, you should absolutely check on that ahead of time, given the sort of social distancing guidelines. I think an incoming tornado is a more pressing risk.
Sure.
If you want to go over to your neighbor's house because they've got a basement and they let you, that's certainly going to be fine. But you should certainly ask if you have those plans with people, or if you've gone to other people's houses in the past. You should talk to them ahead of time and just make sure you both know what the plan is. But yeah, I mean, folks in Stillwater should have their individual sort of severe weather safety plan. Make sure you have it just like you would in any springtime. Make sure you know where you'd go. Make sure your children know where you'd go, where they would go. There's more people at home during the day now, and so you've got maybe a little bit of a different plan, and to make sure the folks that you're living with are aware of it.
Shifting to the political side, you guys have been tasked with making a lot of your own decisions. You and Trish Ranson comes to mind, the state legislator, have been critical of the governor. What would you say to him, and what would you prefer from the state leadership?
I think the governor and the state leadership have done a good job of trying to weigh a lot of different factors, right? I mean, this is a very difficult time for all of us. Everybody that's got some level of responsibility that they're trying to, do the best and make the best decisions that they can with. I think the state, could be a little bit more. I would like to see the shelter-in-place order that they haven't. Sorry, I would like to see the safer-at-home policy that the state has put in place for older folks extended to everyone, like we have here in Stillwater and like communities in Oklahoma City and Tulsa have done. I think the concern is really that this virus is being spread by people who are not necessarily in that vulnerable group, but they can spread it to that vulnerable group, right? And so that the transmission in general needs to be reduced by keeping everybody at home, whether they're highly at risk of medical complications or not, because we are seeing, both people who are below the age of 65. I think both of the deaths we saw over the weekend were people below the age of 65. Um, we're seeing transmission among much younger people, and the more the virus transmits to more and more people, the greater chance that everybody has of getting it, right? So, I mean, the idea of keeping the number of illnesses low to allow our hospital systems to be able to keep up, I think would say that we need to mitigate at a full, statewide level of shelter in place, like we've adopted in many of the cities in the state. But I understand the concerns about why that hasn't been put in place, but at this point, I feel like that would be the better policy.
Yeah. Everyone's got to play their part, and one governor, Kay Ivey, down in Alabama, said if you want football in the fall, you better stay home now. You saw Gundy saying we'd like to have football. A lot of college students watching this interview. Do you foresee at this moment returning to school, say August 20th?
I really couldn't say. I think I'd be surprised if we don't. But that's a decision that the university is going to have to make. From a city perspective, we're going to try to be open safely as soon as we can, and as soon as medical, and public health professionals, feel that it's safe. We certainly want to be open and have students on campus and have normal activities as quickly as possible. It's really difficult to foresee what that looks like in the fall. I would anticipate there will at least be some social distancing measures that are still in place at some level. I would expect that you will see some requirements to wear masks. One of the reasons we haven't required that right now in the city is just that there's still such a shortage.
Yeah.
But as we are able to build up those supplies, I think you will see a more of a requirement, if you're going to be out in public, that you have the mask on. So that may still be in place when we get to the fall and that sort of thing. But it's so hard to tell, looking long term out. I think at this point, it's all up in the air still. But there are smart people at the university making those decisions. We've been in touch and contact a lot with President Hargis's office and the other folks. They've been great partners. So we'll take it a week at a time as we go forward, and hopefully we'll have everything up and running soon.
I know you'd really like to open back up the economy. You had a tweet on April 3rd. It said, "One city in Oklahoma is big enough for this aid," referring to something Congress passed. Oklahoma is the only state where cities rely exclusively on sales tax for operational funding, including public safety. Could you translate that, expand it a little bit?
So that was directed to the first round of stimulus money that Congress passed. And in terms of direct funding to cities and municipalities, they limited that to only cities and municipalities above 500,000 people, which in Oklahoma, the city of Oklahoma City is the only one bigger than 500,000. I think Tulsa County is asserting that they can get that aid because the county is bigger than 500,000, although the city's not. But the rest of us are sort of out in the cold. And that's direct sort of revenue replacement, the same sort of thing that the federal government is trying to do for businesses and for individuals, to say, hey, you've lost income or you've lost this, so here's some cash to tide you over. Cities like ours, we're looking at what could be 50, 60% reductions in our sales tax revenue, given the measures that are in place. And cities in Oklahoma are the only cities in the country. Oklahoma is the only state in the country that forces its cities to rely only on sales tax revenue for operational funding. So all of our police and fire and road maintenance and all of those operational aspects of our city are paid for out of sales tax collections. Mm-hmm. So it's not hard to see that this kind of a disruption is going to be very problematic for cities in Oklahoma to deal with. And so as the federal government is looking at ways to stimulate and to prop up the economy during this time, payments to cities or help to cities directly with these kinds of revenue shortfalls is really going to be necessary. It's not just the big cities that are going to struggle. More than anybody, the smaller cities are going to have these kinds of issues. And so, we really need to figure out ways to help, across the board from an economic perspective, to make sure we're able to provide the services we need to provide.
And another way you can get some funding for the federal government is the census. You're encouraging people to do it while they're at home in quarantine. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, talk about that. Especially from a student perspective, the census, is a huge, huge issue. We talked about it before spring break. I talked about it on this show. We really need students to respond to the census. We need everybody to respond to the census. But given that a lot of off-campus students are no longer in Stillwater right now, we need them to understand, and we need students to understand that you should still respond to the census using your Stillwater address, even if you're not in town. Those census numbers play such a huge role in, we just talked about cities of over 500,000. Well, Congress knows who to give money to based on their census numbers. And so, these census numbers are critical in determining what kind of federal aid may be available. They go into things like hospital funding and how much healthcare spending is allocated in different places. And so if we do not get an accurate count, we will not have the funding available to provide the services for our population. So students who are out of town, who are displaced right now by the pandemic, still need to respond and register for the census using the Stillwater address they would have been living at if everything was normal right now. So you can get online. My2020census.gov is the census website. Please get on there and respond to the census.
Sure. Lastly, what's just your message to Stillwater right now?
Continue to shelter in place. Continue to follow those guidelines around. Please, don't be out in public unless you really need to be out. If you're working at an essential job or you're going, shopping for food that you need, non-essential shopping trips don't need to be happening. Non-essential, gatherings don't need to be happening. So I would urge you to stay home. And again, the better we do this, the more we're able to social distance and slow down this virus, the faster and the easier we'll be able to get started back up again.
Mr. Mayor, thank you.